Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along today. So we're going to start with a prayer, and that's from Carrie Barber. Hello, Carrie. How are you? The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm a member of the Religious Society of Friends, who you probably know as Quakers, also known as Friends, or here in Te Reo, Te Hahi Tuhawiri. We worship out of silence, so we don't have prepared formal prayers. But we do use words from the Bible or from early friends or other people to enrich our worship and contemplation. So what I'm going to do is read two brief quotes from early Quakers that may have bearing on our working together as a community. And then perhaps we can take a minute of silence to think, pray, gather ourselves, and prepare for the meeting. The first is from Isaac Pennington, an English Quaker in 1667. Our life is love and peace and tenderness, and bearing one with another, and forgiving one another, and not laying accusations one against another, but praying one for another and helping one another up with a tender hand. And the second is from John Woolman in the mid-1700s, an American Quaker. There is a principle which is pure, placed in the human mind, which in different places and ages hath had different names. It is, however, pure and proceeds from God. It is deep and inward, confined to no forms of religion, nor excluded from any, when the heart stands in perfect sincerity. In whomsoever this takes root and grows, they will become brothers. Thank you, friends.
These are all.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. So I'll declare open the council meeting for Thursday, 27 November 2014. So councillors, just a housekeeping matter before we start. They've asked that we be conscious of keeping our mics on when we're speaking. I know we're getting used to them, but they're not being picked up on the live stream. So make sure that when you are going to speak that your mic is on. Thanks. First item is apologies. So we've got Councillor McPherson as an apology.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All those in favour, against, carried. Confirmation of agenda now. Councillors, I'm going to just reorganise the agenda if I could, please. Given our members in the public forum, and some of these items I think need to come forward. So I'm suggesting, councillors, that we run with the order down to 7, and then we take rating, which is item 9, then we take item 11, which is the housing, then item 8, the DCs, and then item 10, the Clarence Street Theatre. So with those just adjustments and running order, I'll move. Seconded by Councillor Wilson. All those in favour? Any against? Carried. Declarations of interest. Councillor King, you got a declaration of interest?
Yeah, I have. Thank you. Conflict of interest on item 9.
Okay, thank you. Noted. Public forum. So we have some speakers in the public forum. So this is an opportunity for members of the public to speak for 3 minutes on an item on the agenda. So the first speakers we have are Anna Cox and Rose Black.
Thank you for hearing us today. We just wanted to basically, I guess, firstly to ask your hearts to stand with the deepest of sincerity in your vote today regarding the proposed sale of pensioner housing. We're really concerned about the report that was developed by a member of staff regarding the submissions. We don't believe that the report that summarises the submissions, we think it gives undue weight to the view of only 6% of the submitters. And there's no indication at all that the council has listened to the majority of the submitters. Submissions for the status quo have been written off based on an assessment that suggests we don't understand the ramifications of our suggestion, and we think this is insulting and unfounded, and we fully understand what we are suggesting and asking the council to keep pensioner housing. We are opposed to the sale because it will mean the loss of a public asset that serves to protect and promote the common good and the well-being of our older people.
And the plan for social housing for the city, the strategy for social housing has yet to be developed. And we think that this sale of pensioner housing is entirely preempting any full community engagement with a housing strategy for Hamilton City. And we're really disappointed that the council has gone ahead with putting these units on the agenda for sale. And the council suggests that they will stipulate some conditions that social housing providers must abide by for a period of 10 years. And in light of Hamilton City just celebrating 150 years, this is a very short time span. This is not a time span that protects and offers any security to older people in our city beyond this point.
Yeah, and we're really concerned too that the developments that Christchurch City Council is undertaking to increase their stock has also been written off in the report developed around the submissions, because we think that more research needs to be done around the provision of social housing in Hamilton generally, and this is just too much of a rush decision. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. We need a plan for social housing in Hamilton City before we make any decisions at all to sell off publicly owned housing.
And this plan is about, apparently, about debt, about paying off debt. We think it is an entirely fiscally irresponsible plan that will not serve the debt of this city to any great extent. And in fact, in the long term, it will create a debt for the city in many of the social determinants that vulnerable people experience.
Okay, thank you, Anna and Rose, very much for
Thank
that. Are there any questions for Anna or Rose? No? Thank you. As always, really clear, so thank you very much for that. The next speaker is Roger Hennebreen. Good afternoon, Roger.
Good afternoon, Mayor Julie and councillors. When you were moving the minutes, or moving something a minute ago, I almost said aye with the rest of them. So thank goodness I didn't. Look, and I'm reading your new recommendation and I see it's changed, and some of the emotive language has changed, which I'm happy about. I'm still not happy that you're considering selling them. I'm happy to see that you're taking it upon yourselves not to evict and to only sell to a social provider rather than the open market. I think there are slight improvements from your other motion, shall I say. But when I read the recommendation and you're saying keep it for 10 years, and some of the rhetoric in here says for social housing for the next 10 years, but it doesn't say actually pensioner housing. And actually I think pensioner housing is a major issue, and I know there's issues on the other side too, but I'm only coming from Grey Power's pensioner housing point of view at the moment, that this will probably and most likely decrease pensioner housing in the next 10 years. There's no sign, in my view, that these social providers can provide any more pensioner housing once they're committed on this line. also these same people are going to be going for the state houses. And I just don't know where the money's coming from. I really think it is short-sighted. I don't want to go on too much. I'm not berating council because I know each one has in their own conscience to think about it, but once these are sold, that is the end of it. And you are going to be the first council in New Zealand to do this. And I don't think it's groundbreaking. I think it's a backward step. I really do. And really, you know, I'm upset in a way because we've had so many excuses why we're selling these units. One was because the government said we shouldn't be in it. Well, that's not true. One said the government won't give us any more money. We've never actually asked them for any money, but it may be true from now on. The other one are wraparound services, and I believe that they will still get it, whoever owns it. I'm concerned that there's been no thought about our social policy. I know you've looked at it, but council hasn't got a policy on social housing, and I think you promised to develop one in one of your, what should we say, briefs for the subcommittee. So I'm disappointed in that too. But I think at the end of the day, there will be some relief for some of those pensioners to hear that it's not going on the open market and they have to be vacated. So that's the only positive I can say about it. And I'm open for questions because I'm in a position now where I deal with a lot of old people, and maybe some of you are not quite aware of some of the situations that these people are in. It's not just a house, it's the family that they're going to have to move from. And I'm surprised how family orientated they are. They're not related one little bit, but they do help each other like a family. And I'm disappointed that this hasn't been taken care of. But I'm going to keep this bit short so you can ask me any questions and then I can go on with my other one.
Okay, thank you, Roger, for that. Are there any questions for Roger? Yes, Councillor O'Leary.
I just have one. I was just going to call you Councillor Hennebury. It's hard to do that,
Councillor?
yeah.
Yes.
Roger, you just made a comment about having to get them to move.
Okay, I read in here, and I read the print, and I've read contracts before, and what they're actually saying here, as long as they meet their obligations. Your obligations, as I understand from the social housing providers, that they're going to go for a government housing subsidy. I understand if these tenants stay tenanted, that there will be no eligibility for that subsidy. So therefore, I think it would be in the best interest of those providers to move these people on as quick as they could, because they're going to miss out on that housing policy subsidy, which goes to the home.
So just a follow-up question on that. In a staff report and the recommendation, it says that tenants can stay.
It does, as long as they, and there's a caveat here, meet their obligations. If they cannot get the housing subsidy under the present rules, they can't meet their obligations because the rent would be too high.
No, it's not. It's the tenant meeting the obligation.
Right.
That's in your recommendation that you
But
move.
it's the tenant meeting the obligation, which
Exactly,
means
well-
paying the rent.
Yeah, but if they put the rent up and they're not in a position to pay and the government won't give them a rental subsidy because they're already housed, there's a bit of a technical clause here you should look at. That's why I'm really asking you all to ho and slow down on this and really understand what you're committing to.
All right, Councillor Forsyth, you have a question?
Yeah, just one question. Thanks, Your Worship. Roger, what do you say then to some of the comments that we have heard from existing tenants that say they'd be willing to pay more rent to stay?
Yeah.
I think I heard in this chamber that there were submitters that did say that they would be happy to pay more rent. And
I think that
they're
would
able to
be
stay.
probably clarified that maybe they seem to think that they'd be eligible for a housing benefit. And the government of the day has clearly told me that if they're already housed, there's no subsidy benefit to get. So that's on the grey power one. I better move on to another one, which is...
Well, I just would like to respond to that because there was
what
no
I'm told.
context of subsidy at the time that those comments were made.
Well, I was in the chamber on all occasions, and I don't recall that, Margaret. I'm not disputing, you're not saying it's true, but I don't recall it.
So anyway, sorry, was there another question, Councillor King?
Could I ask the Chair to comment on Angela's question to some clarification around people not leaving the group of social housing and the subsidy.
The housing subsidy the government provides will only provide it on new tenants, not existing.
Yes, that's right, and we've been told that.
Yeah,
That's correct.
but that you're implying that these people are going to be asked to leave if they can't pay. If they can't.
Well, if you can't pay the rent, they'll put somebody else in, and a new person is eligible for the subsidy that can pay the rent. Make no bones about this. This is going to be a business. It's going to be capitalised on to buy new units, so they have to make a profit.
Okay, so Councillor Henneberry, there you go.
Yes, I'm sorry.
See, Roger,
Too familiar.
You live long
Yeah,
after
I
you've
know,
gone.
I
see.
know,
That's
thank you.
nice, isn't it?
Look, can I move on to my own one?
Right, so that was on behalf of Grey Park.
Grey
You're
Park.
now going to speak on behalf of yourself.
My own one is about capital value and land value, and I'm pleased to say that I'm coming at a different angle on this one. I am happy that you're going down this track and recommendation. I think it's going to be hard to swallow for the first year or so, but I think it is a very fair option. And I can only refer to you an instance where somebody may have had sections for a number of years who's paid the same rates as the house next door on land value and actually received nothing for it. So I think it is a far fairer system, and to be honest and pragmatic, the rest of the country's gone this way, and I think you've had to follow. You're only about one of 2 or 3 left in the country to do it. So I think you should follow them, and I think as long as you keep the differential, I think that personally it's a good option. Now, just regard following other councils, I would really love you to follow the council on the pensioner housing that other councillors are doing too. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Any questions for Roger on rating? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much,
Roger.
all.
Right, the next speaker is Sarah Nathan.
Good afternoon, Mayor Hareka and councillors. Thank you for having us and allowing us this time to speak. My name is Sarah Nathan. I'm the Chief Executive of Creative Waikato. I speak in that role, but I also speak on behalf of the Clarence Street Working Party, which came together to present the proposal to Council regarding the Clarence Street future. First of all, I would like to sincerely thank the councillors who took time to engage with this working party, who spent significant amounts of their time working through the issues and understanding the full picture. It's made an enormous difference to the process and helped us to understand the full council perspective as well. I also wish to acknowledge and thank the creative community who came together around this and showed a unity which perhaps hasn't been seen before. The reason we're here today is because the Theatre's review of 2012 recommended the sale of Clarence Street Theatre based on recommendations around cost and low utilisation. What the report didn't recognise was the latent potential of the performance hub for the greater part of the community, its underutilised spaces, which are not just the stage and the auditorium, but rehearsal storage and administration space, the large number of gypsied organisations in our community who would utilise the space if it were affordable and accessible. It did recognise that the theatre is overpriced as a higher-age facility, but it did not directly address the challenge, and it didn't recognise the future needs of a growing city. Over the last year, Creative Waikato has worked extensively with the performing arts community and quickly identified that this theatre has the potential to address the issues which have long hindered this sector and those that are now formally identified in the Waikato Creative Infrastructure Plan. Together, we can take what was a problem for council and transform it into a boon for the community. I'd like to quickly name the organisations who are willing to be part of this proposition. Candando Choir, Waikato Youth Music Association, Waikato Youth Symphonic Band, Waikato Rivertone Chorus, Drury Lane Dance and Performance, Mighty River Harmony, Hamilton Operatic Society, Federation Dance Academy, Waikato Orchestra Society Incorporated, Hamilton Live Music Trust, and the Hamilton Civic Choir. So a working party was formed and a governance group was collected. A community-based model for the ongoing operation of Clarence Street was developed that is sustainable and ultimately profitable. Most importantly, however, it would see the creation of a thriving and colourful creative hub in this city, which would bring joy to many thousands of people in our community over many years. In other cities in New Zealand and around the world, councils are trying desperately to fundraise, to build theatres and to help support their communities thrive and develop. Here in Hamilton, it makes no sense to consider selling such an asset when we know A, what it can be, and B, the growth that is projected for our city. The Clarence Street proposal requests that rather than sell Clarence Street, it is gifted to this highly credible, independent community trust so it can be operated successfully in this city. If Council agrees with our proposal today, we can all look forward to a true creative renaissance for theatre, creativity, our groups and our community.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions for Sarah? No? Okay, as always, very articulate. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, the final speaker in the public forum is Ian Grant.
Thank you. I fully agree with what's been said about pensioner housing. It should not be sold, and I've made that clear in the past. But a bottom line, stop referring to this as social housing. It's pensioner housing. It was built as pensioner housing, it's operated as pensioner housing, it's being sold as pensioner housing. And my main concern is this: if some social housing provider does get ownership of these units, social housing providers provide accommodation for people other than pensioners. And you can imagine the situation that could arise if someone with mental health problems or drug and alcohol related problems were dumped in the middle of a pensioner housing complex. So I would suggest you drop everything, every reference to social housing and call it pensioner housing, and drop the 10-year limit on the what was it, the actual wording, it's a social housing purpose for at least 10 years after any sale. Drop that 10-year limit and insist that they remain for pensioner housing for the entire history of their existence. That is a bottom line. The main preference is don't sell them. They shouldn't be sold.
We'll just see, Ian, if there are any questions for you. Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Mallett.
Thank you very much, Ian. What if there are people in the community with greater need?
The social housing providers and other agencies provide accommodation for them. But what I don't want is a mix of pensioners and people with mental health problems, social health problems, drug and alcohol related problems, and among a group of, I mean, a group of elderly people, you know, they haven't got they can't cope with that sort of thing. They're looking for peace and security, that's all. And they won't have any sense of security or peace of mind if there are people among them with these sorts of problems. But I mean, I'm not knocking the people. I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't have accommodation. But it's something that's a problem or a duty for the health department and the mental health services, not to be mixed with pensioner housing.
Okay, so what if it's not someone who's going to be disruptive, someone with drug problems or mental health problems, but someone who's... Hang on. But it is someone who simply needs a house and has a greater need than someone else. How do you deal with that?
Well, how do you deal with it? I mean, this is pensioner housing, and that's all I'm concerned with. And of course there are people with other problems, and there are other agencies to deal with that.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Ian. Okay, so that's the end of the speakers in the public forum. Item 5, there is no item 5. Item 6, which is on page 6, which are the council minutes.
I'll move.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'll second. Any discussion, councillors, on those ones? Okay, all those in favour? Any against? Yes, we are. Yep. We move all
On
of them.
page 10, it's under there's a, starts off, about halfway down, starts off, General Manager, City Environments responded to the questions from elected members. It talks about $10,000 remaining from the budget of the river plan. Is that to be taken as a recommendation from the council that $10 million be used as...
10,000.
The 10,000, sorry. In another planet. That money be used, is that to be taken as a recommendation or authorisation that that 10,000 be used now for projects rather than for the continuation and development of the plan? Because I don't know if that's what was intended, or may have been what was intended, but it's just not clear in there. It's not.
So we've got an answer. Brian, could you answer that then?
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess that we've still got one last stage to go of the plan, so the submissions have closed. Staff are analysing those at the moment, and there may be some final production costs. Once they're all completed, whatever money is left over will go to progressing the initiatives under that plan, yes.
So as at the end, so as at the time that statement was made, about $10,000 was unspent of the budget. You're suggesting that you think that the most of that $10,000 will be required to complete the production of the plan, as opposed to any actual work on the, any of the projects for the plan.
I'm not sure exactly how much more will be needed to complete the production of the plan, but that's what that will be the objective, and to minimise that, of course, and whatever is left over, to try and move on with as many actions as we can.
Okay.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions for Jude, Democracy Manager, in relation to the Extraordinary Council minutes, because these are the ones on the submissions. I just wanted to check from your perspective that all the information that was requested was circulated to councillors, because there's a number of pieces of information that submitters said they would give us.
Yes, that's my understanding, Your Worship, and I checked with the technical staff who advised that for submissions 623, 628 and 631,
yes,
Russell McVeigh indeed did provide information to staff which has been incorporated.
Right, thank you. Right, councillor.
Just
yes.
one point, Your Worship, if I may. Re-apologies on page 8.
Page 8.
The Ordinary Council agenda. I wonder if it could be noted, please, that my apology was accepted, but could it be noted that I was on council business?
Yes.
That's right, Councillor Forsyth, you were at
I was at a
conference, that's right, yes. Okay, with that
Noted, Your Worship.
Thank you. Any other points? All right, we'll vote. All those in favour? Any against? Carried. Thank you. Next item is on page, is item 7, and it's on page 37, and these are yours, Councillor O'Leary, your recommendations.
Yes, Your Worship. I'm happy to do those separately if that would help Council.
Okay.
So with that, I will move the first one, significant engagement policy be adopted.
Seconded by Councillor King. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Next.
And move the cemeteries management plan.
Right, seconded Councillor King. Discussion, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Second, the libraries review strategic plan.
Okay, Councillor King seconded. Any discussion, all those in favour?
Aye.
Any against?
And very happy to accept, to move the dog exercise area plan for the city.
And Councillor King's also seconding that. All
I'll
those
speak to that.
in the dog exercise?
Yes.
Go for it, Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, because that's a
Enlighten us.
recommendation. Now, unfortunately, I apologise, I wasn't there for that committee. I just want to say, I think, good broad direction of travel. I just obviously will take a very clean eye on the lake development in terms of making sure that that works appropriately to ensure that the interests of the residents, the yacht club and the rest of the users. I realise it is a dog space, basically now, but obviously just as we roll out with the fenced areas, I think it would be really useful if staff regularly, if you like, report back to us of how they are going so that we can monitor, if you like, a bit of the micro detail and do the tweaking as need be. I certainly commend staff and Councillor O'Leary for the evolution, and other councillors involved in the evolution. I've seen this in Australia or other cities, but I would ask that we actually just monitor this as it goes on.
Right.
Are you for dogs or against dogs?
Oh, I'm a great dog lover, as you know.
Right, okay, thank you. So, Councillor, just remind me on this plan, there's because there's a reporting mechanism back to your committee, 6 monthly, something like that?
Yes,
is it?
yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
So, Councillor Gallagher, there's a 6 monthly reporting on the implementations plan back to S&P. So that will cover your point?
That's fine, and I'm sure Councillor McPherson will be delighted by that as well.
Right, okay. All those in favour? Any against? Okay, number 5.
And, Your Worship, I'll move the Safety in Public Places bylaw adoption report.
Okay, seconded by Councillor King. Any discussions? Okay, all those in favour? Any against? Carried. Right, thank you, Councillor O'Leary. All right, so councillors, we're now moving on to item 9, the rating review, page 58. The CEO is going to speak to this report, so that's page 58.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship and Councillors. I'm going to ask John Gibson and Stephen Halliwell to join the front of the table. They've provided the technical support.
Okay.
I'm not going to take the report as read. I am going to step through a number of points and then finish off with considering it read at that stage. This was a significant decision by which we went through a special consultative procedure. We did receive 666 submissions and we've heard 42 of those. The key point to note here that level of submissions is low compared to previous times when we've gone out and undertaken a rates review consultation process. When we did the last one in 2011, there was 2,700, in excess of 2,700 submissions, so it's 666, that is low. The submissions we received were of a high quality, and as noted in the report, that at an elected member briefing we did actually undertake and provide some summary of those themes. And it should be noted that based on that, there is no recommended change to the statement of proposal, and it is management's recommendation we progress with the statement of proposal as it currently stands. Just want to note to a degree some of the legislative requirement issues. Through the submission and hearing process, a number of commercial submitters did highlight substantial rate increases that they would attract under the proposal. Staff have given careful consideration and has been given to those submissions and for various options to reduce those increases. The recommendations of this report do not support modifications to the proposal in order to reduce their rates. And we do note that making modifications of this nature would shift the rates burden to another sector. Council should be aware that the financial implications on some large commercial ratepayers may mean that it may justify cost and expense of those commercial ratepayers to actually undertake a legal challenge.
Excuse me, Your Worship, can I just have one question? Go back about a paragraph, you said that putting caps on some of their increases would shift the rates burden to another sector.
Or within that sector, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
A good point, yeah, sorry. Either within, depending on the nature of...
Other commercials would...
Yep. To be clear, one of the themes that we're going to talk to did refer to actually changing the yields, which would shift it to another sector as well. So that's what I was referring to as potentially. Okay. But as well as, thank you, Councillor Ballot, would also shift it within a sector as well. Thank you. Just wanted to note that there may be, based on the level of increase and the cost of undertaking a legal review, there may be a review, but the key point we want to make is that we believe that this process, and we know this process and is supported through by our legal advisors, that we legally comply from a process point of view, and our recommendation is robust in that respect. A key aspect of this is the consultation, and staff's opinion, the requirements of the legislation in terms of the consultation were exceeded. We believe we undertook a robust consultation process, and the steps we took were appropriate and, in my view, exceeded what would be reasonable in this case. There were a significant number of ratepayers that opposed the proposal. However, we do note they were the ratepayers that received the increase. And a comment that we make in the report, and I just want to reiterate that 666 ratepayers is a small portion of the 55,400 total ratepayers in Hamilton. So the overwhelming majority of ratepayers did not submit. There were a number of themes that came through the report. And one of the themes that did come through is submitters were more likely to oppose the rates increase than being opposed to capital value. You'll recall a number of your colleagues did question individual ratepayers on their views about the ideology of capital rating versus land rating, and some of the feedback that did come back was that it was the increase they were more concerned with than the shift. In our view, the shift that has been addressed adequately through the 10-year transition. So that's the view there. The next theme was commercial submitters with large increases opposed to change the capital value and proposed a variety of solutions. That was largely around a number of ratepayers received over $1 million increases. There was recommendation was that a number of items, including special differentials, rate caps and so forth, should be implemented as a way to address those increases. It is staff's view that no new information were raised by those submitters that would change our view and the information that had been previously provided to Council, and that the proposal was appropriate. There was a reference to, by a number of submitters, that a change to the capital value rating system would inhibit commercial investment. In fact, one of our submitters actually undertook their own economic impact assessment. We have also, in response to that, canvassed a number of local government practitioners, and the view was held that given that 9 out of 13 councils have moved to capital value and they are not aware of any evidence to support that claim in terms of the impact on investment decisions, but we also to support that commission an independent economics analysis to be undertaken, and that is included in this report here as appendix attachment 2. And effectively they drew a couple of conclusions. Their analysis indicated that movements were expected. They did note that whether the investment decision is marginal, that is, that if someone's making a decision to invest in Hamilton, if the investment decision was marginal, rates may be a consideration, but only an influencing factor as opposed to a determining factor. In terms of the comments in the report as well, it also notes that the 10-year transition period would allow firms to adjust the different cost structures also. So that also reflected the fact that the 10 years is a tool that actually impacts positively on these increases and provides an opportune time for these businesses to change their practices and effectively budget appropriately. So there's a degree of certainty provided. There was some comments that through some of the themes that I'm talking about item 44 now, sorry, I should have referenced as I was going through. Some commercial submitters advised the allocation of 34% of the general rate to the commercial sector was unfair and did not reflect the benefit received. The key point we note here is the rating system is not a user-pays system. Benefit is only one matter the council should consider when deciding on the appropriate allocation. We also do note a reference to the Wellsworth versus Wellington case, and also supported by our legal advisors, that council is not required to adopt a clean slate approach, is entitled to have regard to the starting position, to weigh the impact of the changes on this type of the properties and look to the interest of its ratepayers. And then we go on to also note is that, and this is looking at the level of submissions that happened back in 2011, 2012, that if we were to look to move the differentials and remove them even, the move of $18 million would have a negative impact on the residential sector. And having regard to that, we consider that the maintaining the current yields in the current sectors is appropriate. There was some comment about maintenance of the current CBD differential that came through as a theme. We believe that that is still appropriate given council's policy's intention. Item number 46, residential submitters objected to high increases and did not see the increase in benefit for the residential rates. That's same as the commercial increases, and we believe the 10-year transition still holds in that context as well. And there's also the comment there in terms of it being in line with property increases. It did say there was themes in item 47 that we captured in terms of the impact on fixed income ratepayers, and we do note there that council does have in place various policies for genuine hardship that can be available as well. And one of the other items that came through as a theme through a number of people, and also came through on the day of the hearing, was a number of ratepayers were also suggesting other methods of charging rates, and that was a move towards user pays. So a number of people have done some modelling on various user pay options. That wasn't the part of the analysis undertaken at the time, and if council wishes to pursue that, would have to fully analyse and consult on that. So I just wanted to make sure we step through that. The key point now is that we have 3 options available to us, and that's adopt the proposal, which is our recommended position. If we do that, there's a number of policy work that needs to be undertaken to reinforce that as part of the 10-year plan process. Council has the option to modify that proposal, and to the extent to modification may require us to do significantly more work or not, depending on the modification, but also may require us to re-consult depending on the nature of that modification as well. And council also has the opportunity as an option to reject the proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Any questions? And I'm assuming also questions can be answered by these guys.
Absolutely.
Right, so I've got Councillor Pascoe.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. First one is, I note on page 27, submission 489, Braemar Hospital indicated in their submission that Braemar Hospital, of course, is a charitable trust. They indicated that they were going to come back to us with some further information about how other local authorities were charging rates to what might be deemed a commercial enterprise, but which operated under a charitable trust. Have we had any feedback?
Through you, Your Worship, no, we've had no information back from Braemar since those hearings.
Okay, thank you. The other question that I've got is, we commissioned this report with Market Economics, and I suppose that was in a response to a number of the submissions, including the one from Westfield and the detailed report that came with Hamilton Home Zone. Have we shared that report from Market Economics with either or both or those or any other groups?
No, we haven't, apart from it being on this agenda.
Apart from it being on, yeah, okay. We haven't had any feedback from them then since it's been on the public website, on the website.
And through you, Your Worship, Councillor Pascoe, that this report basically came just in time for us to include it in the agenda as well. So we haven't had the opportunity to circulate that. So this is the first public hearing for this item.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Has anyone else got any other questions on this? No? Okay. All right, we have a recommendation, a staff recommendation on page 59.
I'll move.
I'll second. So Councillor Wilson has moved. I've seconded the staff recommendation. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. Look, I'll be incredibly brief. I've waited nearly 12 years for an opportunity to help move the city in what I believe is the correct direction towards capital value. I'm the first to acknowledge, and this will come as no surprise to most of you, there is no fair tax system. It's blunt. It's incredibly blunt. But in fact, I think the move to capital is slightly sharper than the current land model. I think we'll find better equity and fairness in a move to capital. I accept that we will often hear from those who see the detrimental effect, and we don't often hear for those who will have the benefit. But I think to those in the commercial sector who feel this is an unfair move, I remind them that nearly in every other city in the country where they do business, where they have property, this is the reality. And it is ludicrous that we have a situation in Hamilton where two pieces of land side by side, exactly the same size, can have an elderly woman living in a 2-bedroom unit and a large development on the other with multiple units, and they pay the same rates. It doesn't make sense. So this is a move towards a more balanced rating system, and I hope that we make this decision today and have the courage of our convictions, because we've waited quite a while.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any other? Yes, Councillor Pascoe.
Yes, I would support Councillor Wilson. Rates are a tax, and unfortunately, in terms of how we view taxation generally, there's no accurate way of fairly distributing the tax take over all ratepayers or taxpayers. I think what capital value does, it's perhaps akin in an income tax analogy to taxing all of the income rather than, in this case, all of the asset rather than only part of it. And I think if I take an income tax analogy, it's a little bit like saying we'll tax your earned income, we'll tax your investment income, but we're not going to tax your income that you earn from personal exertion. So I think capital value does take us to that step where it's an overall tax, and it is a fair tax in the sense that it's taxing the total value and not just part of it. I'd also like to make the point too that there has been a fair and active public consultation on this, and there's been detailed analysis and subsequent research and discussion, some of which which the Chief Executive has talked about today. So we've not only heard the submissions, but we've gone away and commissioned a major additional report to validate or question what was correct and what may not have been in the submitters' presentations. I'd also like to thank the staff for their efforts and assistance in clearly presenting the complexities of the change to the community, because it's by no means a simple exercise to present. And I think at the same time they have given elected members an opportunity to grapple around the significant challenges that, if we do pass this today, past councils have struggled to implement. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I stand also to speak in support of the move. Just want to make a couple of points. First of all, there is some confusion that a change from a land value system to a capital value system increases the total rates that are collected. That is incorrect. The same amount of rates will be collected no matter which way it's collected, but in my perception, and I agree with a lot of what Ewan said, but where he uses the word balance, I'd replace it with the word just. And I think it is more just if the rating system more accurately, and I agree with Ewan when he says neither system is particularly accurate, but the capital value system, to my way of thinking, is more accurate at assessing the cost of the council services that any particular property will receive. So I think that a move towards capital value based on a 10-year transition period is a move toward a more just rating system, because it more accurately reflects the cost of any particular property. And I think the 10-year mitigation is a very helpful tool to use, because for some people to introduce this over 1 year would be extraordinarily difficult, given that they have made investment decisions based on a land value system. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mallett. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm also going to support Councillor Wilson's resolution. Capital value is the closest to a fair and equal way to calculate rates. Probably not the ideal situation, but it's a lot fairer than the land value. All other cities like Hamilton and bigger are on capital value. And 8 years ago, the government's independent review of local government funding recommended capital value. The impact, of course, and there will be an impact for some, there are winners and losers, but the impact is smooth over the 10-year transition period, as identified by Councillor Mallett. The thing that continues to surprise me in the local government sector is that government, and I don't care which one or which colour, does not remove GST on residential rates, a tax on a tax. And while this isn't the debate today, I want to make that point that I am surprised that government does not move to make that change, or even to make rates for residential property owners tax deductible, as it is for commercial and industrial users. As councillors, we often hear about the hardships that we impose on ratepayers. And I read the letters to the editor saying, you are forcing us out of our homes. And there needs to be some balance here. There are two schemes currently available and have been available for some time. The first scheme is a government scheme, costs our ratepayers nothing. It's a rates hardship scheme. And last year, over 2,200 odd Hamilton ratepayers received about $1.5 million from the government to assist with the payment of rates. Now, the Hamilton City Council has its own hardship scheme, and if you qualify for both, a ratepayer can get up to $1,000 as a remission on their rates. But the sad thing is, it's about crying wolf. Council has a budget of $345,000 for its hardship scheme. And just over 400 people qualified for that last year and received $199,000 to go towards their rates. And for the last 3 years, the hardship budget has not been used. Now, a few weeks ago, I circulated a paper to my council colleagues arguing for an extra $100,000 in the budget in the 10-year plan process. Why would I argue for $100,000 when we don't even spend the money we've allocated? Well, my point is that as colleagues, when we come to have that discussion, we need to consider lowering the criteria to make the barriers less so more people can qualify. But I do fear the people who write the letters to the editor and cry wolf are not qualifying for these accounts because they're reluctant to be transparent. Transparent about the trust protection for their house, the beach house, money in the bank, all criteria that have got to be spelt out in the application form. So I just make that point. Be careful when ratepayers cry wolf, because we're going to check you out and we've got the systems in place to help. So please don't abuse the system. I want to make it better for more people. And I compliment ex-councillor Roger Henneberry, because he and I lifted the budget some 5 or 6 years ago and the position was exactly the same then, and double the number of people qualified. So I just want to make those broader points, Your Worship, around GST, around the hardship scheme, and my support for capital value rating. Thank you.
Okay, any other speakers on this? Councillor Tooman.
Yes, Your Worship. My concern, of course, is...
Are you on?
Are you on, mate?
Yeah, my concern, of course, Your Worship, is that the Chief Executive referred to the 666 persons who took time out of their lives to make the submissions. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the 666 number, but what we must look at, of course, is the number of submitters who are opposed to the change from the land to the capital value. In this case, of course, we have 71% of our residents out there who are actually opposed to change from land to capital value. I think what we have to do as a council, of course, is to listen to those persons who actually made the effort to submit. I know that during the discussions that there was a number of reasons why, if your house was worth more than maybe the place next door, then you should be paying a higher rate. When we look as to the dollar value of the rates, which I think from memory is about $153 million, which we take on an annual basis here in the city, this is not going to change at all. All we're really doing, of course, in this case, is to spread the load or change from those persons who are paying less may be paying more, and vice versa. Of course, there's always going to be winners and losers, whatever the tax system is, and accordingly I will be voting against it because I firmly believe that we must listen to our community.
Thank you, Councillor Tooman. Any other speakers? I'll just add some comments, councillors. I want to start actually by thanking the staff who have worked on this, and that's you, John, it's you, Stephen, and Richard in his role as CFO. I don't think I've been through a process in my short time on council that has been so thorough, I have to say. And I have really valued the approach that staff have taken in terms of the information, which can be quite complex at in some stages. I attended all of the meetings with the public and other meetings where we were invited by various groups to go along and talk about this topic. I found that also a very valuable process. What was interesting, however, was that those meetings were very poorly attended and there were very few people who came to talk about rates. I have been surprised about the low level of submissions, given that last time we had 2,700 submissions, but I do wonder whether that's because the proposal had a real sense of clarity about it, which again is a credit to the way the staff have worked on this. I'm supporting a change to capital value rating for these reasons. I think that land value gives rise to a lot more anomalies than capital value. There's always anomalies, but land values are more glaring, and Councillor Wilson gave a very real example of that, which we see right across our city. I think capital value is more reflective of the services that are provided. It will bring us into line with other councils across New Zealand. Every metro has capital value rating. All of the Waikato councils have capital value rating, and the government indicated that capital value rating was where it saw matters when it established the super city, and in legislation required them to have capital value rating. My major concern through the submissions was the submission on the impact this might have on our commercial investment in the city. I thought that was a very compelling submission, and I was concerned about the information provided. My concerns have been addressed because we have received an independent report from an economic analysis which has said that impact, and in fact I think the words are very good in the report, which I found very helpful to read, that it does not appear to have a material impact. This is on page 75, which I thought gave me a high level of comfort, and that is further mitigated by the 10-year lead-in time. So I think in two respects we have covered that issue that was raised from my perspective. The other thing that's really important for me is that we are not changing yields by this proposal. And I do recall last time we went through this when I was on the council, and the change in the way the pie was divided caused the greatest number of submissions and concerns. And I think that we have the yield right when we consider how the services are divided and who uses them. So I was happy about that as well. One of the final comment I want to make is that it did not matter what side of the debate submitters were on. Many submitters raised the issue of user pay, I guess, and flat rates for certain services. And that was right across the broad spectrum, and there were a number of submitters who raised that matter. The staff report does say that that is something that if council wishes to have a closer look at would need a lot more analysis, obviously. But I do signal that it may be, councillors, that we do need to have a closer look at some of the submissions made in that regard in the coming years, to see what our views might be on that, and more importantly, what community views are. That to me was sort of a theme that transcended whatever side of the debate you sat on. People were raising that issue, and I also heard that at the meetings that I attended. So I guess that's something in the waiting list, so to speak. So finally, I just want to say I think that this is the best staff report I have read in the entire time that I've been on the council. So thank you very much for the way it's been presented. Did you want to add something else, Councillor Mallard?
Just a question for clarity of everyone. If this gets passed, it will take effect from rating year 15-16. Is that right? Okay, so the media and whatnot can get that correct, yeah, thank you.
Right, Councillor Wilson, you have a right to reply if you want to exercise it, no?
Required,
Okay.
Your Worship.
You're quiet, okay.
Not required.
Not required, right. All right, councillors, we're going to go to the board and vote on this.
You're going to have to turn Andrews off. No, she'll just reset it.
It's carried, Your Worship, 9 votes for, 2 against, but unfortunately Andrew King's voting was not removed, so you can take it on my voice or you can go to the board again.
I think we'll go to the board, thank you.
Carried, 9 votes for, 2 against.
Thank
Apologies, Your Worship.
Right, thank you. Right, councillors, the next item that we will take is item 11, the Older Persons Pensioner Housing Review at page 106. Right, welcome along, Blair and Elton. So, Blair, I think you're going to speak to this report.
Yes, I am, Your Worship. Good afternoon, councillors. Just a brief summary of the report. Just as a background, councillors will recall that discussions on pensioner housing have been ongoing for the majority of this year. And back in March of this year, through the annual plan process, a discussion paper was received as part of the annual plan process. And then following that, at the 27th of March meeting, a series of resolutions were passed by council to initiate a process to review the pensioner housing service, including the establishment of a working group to support staff in that process. Since the time of that resolution, there has been a number of discussions with social housing providers. An options paper has been developed. There has been a meeting with pensioner housing group. A further statement of proposal has been formally produced, and there has been public consultation through the statement of proposal. The submissions received were 284. 45 of those were heard, and the submissions received were of a very high quality standard. After the considerations of the submissions, and I note, and the key matters raised, and I note the report has outlined those matters in some detail and discussion around those, a change is recommended by staff to that which was promoted through the statement of proposal. And the change more closely reflects what I would refer to as option 4B in the statement of proposal. And I note that through the submission process, while the majority of submitters were opposed to the proposal, upon further analysis of those submissions and also through some of the questions and discussions at the hearings, there were key themes that a number of the residents wanted the pensioner housing tenancy protected, and also that the community didn't want an overall decrease in the number of social housing units in the city. So the recommendation in particular looks to address those two concerns, but also recognises that social housing providers are better positioned and better able than council to grow the provision of social housing in the city, particularly those social housing providers who would be accredited, who can then access government capital funding and also for qualifying tenants in the future income-related rent subsidy. The specific recommendations, and I'll summarise those, first of all are that the social housing portfolio should be sold, but only to social housing providers. This is quite different from the statement proposal, so it's certainly excluding any sale on the open market. There are conditions attached to that recommendation in that sale. Those, first of all, are that all tenants can remain in the accommodation, subject to them meeting their tenancy obligations. Now, I'll just clarify that particular point because I think it's important too. The wording there is intended to reflect the fact that tenants do currently obviously have tenancy agreements, which talk to things such as meeting their rent, being able to live independently, the way that they treat their properties and the way they conduct themselves in the complexes, and it's that intent. Certainly not the intent as expressed through the public forum that it's a way to allow the new purchasers to dramatically increase the rent and thereby somehow lead the tenants to have to leave the complexes. That's not the intention of that wording. It is around the tenants
behaving and conducting themselves in the manner that they would under council's current tenancy obligations. The second condition would be that the pension housing properties would be used solely for social housing for a minimum of at least 10 years. And this reflects the similar conditions that council placed on the sale of properties back in 2012. And the third condition is that the overall number of social housing units is maintained, so that which is purchased from council is maintained by the new purchasers. The sale would be conducted through a request for expression of interest process, but that process wouldn't start till the 23rd of February next year, so 3 months from now, and that process would run for a period of 6 months. And this reflected the submitters who requested they needed more time if they were to put forward purchase proposals. And the final element of the recommendation is that any unsold properties at the conclusion of that process would be reported back to council for further direction. So I think that again is an important distinction from the statement of proposal. The report also identifies there are other options available to council, primarily reverting back to the status quo, in other words continuing as we do now, or alternatively running with the proposal and the statement of proposal which was available for public consultation. The report identifies the reasons why staff are not recommending either of those two alternative options. So, Your Worship, happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you, Blair. So I've got Councillor Mallett, then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Blair. Just some questions on clarity in the recommendation. Romans 2, that pensioner housing properties be used solely for social housing purposes for at least 10 years. Why at least? I don't think the words "at least" add anything to it and actually add some confusion. I just think clarity would be improved if you say that pensioner housing be used solely for social housing purposes for 10 years after any sale. Then at that stage, is there a suggestion that somewhere along the line we might change that and make it 20 years or 100 years?
No, I think the suggestion is a minimum of 10 years if you wish to word it something.
So if you just take out "at least," is that
would be...
The lawyers in the place is that more accurate? Yep.
I think to be clear, the intention was that in any sale for a minimum of 10 years, they must be used for social housing purposes.
Right, thank you. Did you have another
And the other one was, and then on Romans 3, we start talking about the overall number of social housing units. Now, that's something council has no control. I mean, there are people in the social housing sector building houses and
these are the units purchased from council. So,
okay, that needs to be clear then.
Well, I think it needs to be read in conjunction with the introduction paragraph B. So these are conditions pertaining to the sale of the properties from council.
Oh, okay, that's okay. And then there's no date on that. Now, no one knows in 20 years' time how many social housing units we need or don't need. Nobody knows what a social housing unit might look like in 20 years' time. So I think that basically says that whoever buys these things has to maintain and keep those same units as they are for eternity. And I can tell you, I guarantee you in 10, 15 years, there will be calls for those things to be pulled out and rebuilt in a different way, in a different format, because there are different ways. I mean, my friend here, Karina, is in the building industry, and the way you build a house now is dramatically different than the way you built a house 15 years ago. So
I think the intention of that particular word, and I think you've raised a good observation there, Councillor, is that it doesn't preclude a purchaser from looking to remodel or to do some work in those complexes. But what the intention there is that the number of units is preserved overall in terms of the quantum stock they purchase. But they may wish to demolish a particular complex and rebuild it, reconfigure it, add to it. In terms of the point around time frame, it may be appropriate to link that time frame to the same time frame.
There should be some end to it. So it's 10 years or something.
Potentially, councillors may wish to add 10 years into that.
Because you may actually lock someone into a very bad model. You know,
I think certainly if you were to link the 10 years as you have in point 2 above, that would make sense.
Okay, now I've got Councillor...
So just be clear, so are we taking at least, just so, because are we going to make some wording changes?
Well, I suppose that's up to whoever moves a motion if they're going to do that. So I've got questions at the moment, which is
Okay.
Councillor Wilson, you've got your next, then Councillor Forsyth, then the Deputy Mayor, then Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I've got a couple of questions. Gary has picked up on a couple of them. But in terms of that all existing tenants can remain within the pensioner housing portfolio, provided they meet the standard requirements of good behaviour and paying their rent. Is there a period of time stipulated in the current tenant documents?
No, there's not.
So, do I interpret that in fact, God forbid, while the tenants are alive and meeting the conditions of the tenancy, they have the right to abode?
I think it's no different to the current circumstances. I mean, the pensioner housing complexes that we provide at the moment are not an aged hospital type facility. So I think we are mindful and sensitive to those issues as our tenants get older. Those same discussions occur with our tenants currently. It's that same scenario which I'm trying to describe here in the recommendation.
The reason I raised that is I wanted to have some sort of certainty about duration, because it does get a little bit complex, because in the next line you talk about 10 years, because basically how I've interpreted that 10 years is once that 10 years has passed, actually the new owner can pretty much do what they see fit. And then there was the very confusing third paragraph that actually contradicted the second, because it then said, but the number of overall pension housing must be at the current level.
So what's your question, Councillor Wilson?
Well, I'm just trying to get a better explanation. First of all, am I correct in my understanding of point 2, that after 10 years, the operator can do as they see fit in terms of this building?
Yes, they could.
Right, so they could charge whatever market rates.
The restriction after 10 years is removed if a council runs with 10 years.
So they could pull it down, they could turn them into townhouses, they could do whatever they see fit.
And that is consistent with the same conditions that council placed upon the sale of the property back in 2012, which was a 10-year term.
Right.
So that councillors could, if council was of mind, they could extend that time frame.
Right.
There's nothing to stop council from
All
making
right.
that.
So in the spirit of being helpful, Councillor Mallet will obviously work on trying to address point 3, because the wording there just is inconsistent with point 2. My final question is in regards to the current subsidies. Just remind me, what subsidies do the tenants currently attract?
So the tenants currently are eligible through the WINS subsidies, where they receive an accommodation supplement depending on their circumstances and their income, which obviously we charge the rent based on the unit, and they receive a subsidy subject to those circumstances.
Please explain to me the difference between that and the new subsidy that potentially is available through the government being discussed in the Christchurch project. Just explain to me the difference.
The difference is that the new subsidy is about a much higher quantum, but the eligibility criteria is very different to that upon which our model is here. So it refers to different types of tenants in need. It's a wider category, but it does provide for those that are eligible a higher amount of money.
Am I correct in understanding, and I'm nearly finished, Your Worship, because this is very helpful, certainly for me. Am I correct in understanding that a sale to a private social housing provider, the tenants would still be entitled to the WINS accommodation supplement, but they would not be entitled to the higher quantum as we've seen in Christchurch?
For the tenants that we currently have, that is correct.
Sorry, Blair. I think there's a bit of confusion here. Sorry, Councillor Wilson, but I think there's some confusion here. The income-related rent subsidy that the government has introduced doesn't go to the person. It goes to the provider.
That's correct.
Accredited social. This is all information, councillors, in the reports that you have received. So I think we need to be clear here.
Yes,
I don't want confusion. That is a subsidy available to the social housing provider to bring them up to a market rent. Okay, it's not. It doesn't go to the tenant. So I'm quite mindful that we're not getting confused here. Now, all the information's in the reports, but I think Councillor Wilson is trying to get clarity for himself, and he needs to receive the accurate response. I'm sorry, I'm looking through to Dee, because Deanne is probably the person that would best be able to answer your questions, I think. Dee, I wonder if you can come here, because sorry, Councillor Wilson, but I understand what you want to know, and I think they're good questions, and I'm wanting to make sure that there's no confusion here.
If I may, through the chair, you're correct, Your Worship. So the IRR subsidy is actually paid to the accredited provider.
You need to speak into the microphone.
Sorry.
Is it on?
Yes, it is.
Right.
Apologies. You're correct. The IRR subsidy is actually paid to the social housing provider. He has to be accredited and go through a rigorous process through central government to obtain that accreditation. Any person living in any rental accommodation or any paid, if they own their own property, are eligible through work and income to apply for an accommodation supplement, which is very different from the IRR subsidy. And that's all based on, it's all income means tested, the accommodation supplement.
Thank you.
Which is paid at a different rate.
Yep, no, that's great. My final question, and it's to Blair, and it's just to get an idea of the comments and submissions that we heard from social housing providers who were potentially interested in buying these assets. My recollection, and there may have been a level of confusion in their own minds, but my recollection was that part of the commentary was for this to be a feasible option for them, they needed to have access to the IRI supplement. Am I correct in saying that? Or were they in fact saying, no, it still works if the tenant is eligible for the WINS payment?
I think the answer is probably a mixture of both, Councillor. It will ultimately come down to the sale price, which is offered to council, which is also part of the equation. As we know, the report recommends that the properties be used for social housing purposes, which over time could well mean a change in the mix of tenants, which could well mean that some of the new tenants would be eligible for that income-rated rent subsidy, which would therefore mean that the rental profile for those properties would change from that which council currently receives. So I think the answer is we would anticipate that through the process of offers, that we will see offers that reflect that combination of factors I've talked about there. And therefore it would be viable.
Thank you.
Could I just interject and just seek some clarity to the first question Councillor Wilson asked? Just the way the recommendation is currently worded, if a tenant met their obligations for the next 15 years, could they stay in the pension housing for the next 15 years?
Yes, they could.
So
there is no time limit prescribed against that particular obligation.
So
as there is at the present time, that the tenants, provided they meet their obligations, there is no time limit.
So does that have priority over the subsequent point? And
that's why I'm asking the question, Councillor Wilson. Confirm it does.
To be honest, I'm sure some wordsmiths need to sit down and have a really good look at this, because it's badly crafted. Its crafting needs improvement, because Even I can find the gaps.
Yeah, and that's why I asked the question, to seek clarity of the intention, and acknowledge that it needs to be tightened up, including Roman numeral 3. I think potentially could be redundant in this context if we work on the wording for number 2 as well. So we need to, we'll take that on board, and I'll work on it now.
Right, thank you. Councillor Forsyth, you've got some questions?
Thank you. Can we just go back to the tenancy agreements? And I just want to understand that if the sale were to go ahead, does that mean that the tenancy agreement, the current tenancy agreement with the incumbents would then be transferred? So would the conditions of the tenancy agreement be transferred to a new owner, or would that change?
No, there would be a new tenancy agreement entered into with the tenants, but the key points would be protected by way of the legal arrangements which would be put in place between council and the purchaser. So the intentions would be captured in a legal contract between council and the purchaser. So whilst a new tenancy agreement would be negotiated, the tenants could be afforded the protections through the legal agreement that council would have with the purchaser.
Okay, so just to be clear, we could, through a caveat or some other legal instrument through the sale agreement, make sure that the things that we want covered can be covered. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Just another point. If the rent, let's say this were to happen, the sale were to happen, and if we go continuing with the rent thing, if the rent changed, let's say it was increased for whatever reason, and the current tenants, Dee, actually you might be able to answer this, if the tenants were not able, let's say if the rent was increased, would the tenants be able to go to WINS and apply for an increased level of assistance or subsidy? Is that capped? Do you know if that's a capped assistance, or does that increase through that means testing?
Through the chair, that's correct. So they'd still be able to go back to work and income and test their eligibility against the accommodation supplement subsidy. So it'll be all dependent on their circumstances and what the changes were. So then they'd be reassessed under that. So, but it is capped. The accommodation supplement is capped.
Okay.
I would also note, councillors, that the current policy that council has does provide for a yearly review of the rental levels, and those rental levels are benchmarked against the local government benchmark for similar properties. So that is the basis upon which rentals are reviewed and increased on a per annum basis. So there is a policy which very much drives council's current pricing of those particular complexes.
Okay, thank you. Nearly finished. I just want to refer to the Johnson Street flats, because that was the block of flats that we sold that were purchased by social housing providers. That's a partnership with Habitat and Crosslight Trust. Are you able to tell us, and I think some of the submitters did mention this earlier on, whether the rent increased when that sale took place?
I don't have the specific details. There is some information from Nick Green, the Chief Executive, in terms, as an attachment to one of the earlier reports, but my understanding is there was an increase in rental, but I don't have the specific figures on hand. But there was also some considerable improvements made to the properties at the same time to lift the standard of the accommodation provided for those tenants.
Yes, we a handful of us councillors visited the premises and were able to chat to tenants and had an understanding of how their situation had actually improved since the handover to Habitat and Crosslight. Just one other question, and it comes from some of the earlier comments about the fact that what sort of consultation or engagement has council undertaken prior to this proposal. So I would like an understanding of that, and if you could just detail for me or explain what sort of stakeholder or interagency discussions on social housing and our social housing stock for the future has the city been involved in, or the council been involved in? Are you able to answer that?
Yes, I can. I guess section 14 of my report tries to provide an outline of those discussions. So there has been a number of discussions with social housing providers, including Housing New Zealand as well, in attendance. And those particular meetings, I guess, discussed first of all the discussions paper, and then led to the development of the options paper. So those occurred during the course of March through to August, where council staff, some members of the working party, met with those wide-ranging representatives from the social housing sector.
And I understand that's where we've got to today. What about planning for the future, or discussions about the future? And because we understand the demographics of our city and future demographics, etc., there is a need. There's not only pensioner housing that there is a need for, but there, as Councillor Mallett's referred to earlier, there are other people of other needs and greater needs in the community, and they need to be, from a city approach, they need to be their needs need to be met as well. So what sort of input or discussions have council had in that space going forward?
So I think part of that may be referring to the social housing plan, which is an outstanding item to be completed in terms of the working groups terms of reference, and that's covered in paragraph 56 of the report. The resolution of council was to identify a process for the development of a social housing plan, and the intention is that the working group will continue to work with the social housing providers to develop that process and to develop that plan. That piece of work has not been completed as at this stage.
If it hasn't been completed, has there been any work done in that space thus far?
Not significant work, no.
Councillor, of course, I am aware that there have been some discussions in the community amongst the social housing providers about developing that plan, and Dee, you might be able to help here. So going back a couple of years, there were meetings amongst the social housing providers to start that process, and that fell away, and I'm aware more recently Habitat has started driving that again.
That's correct, Your Worship. It did sort of fall by the wayside. I think it got a little bit too hard for, having those discussions. And I think in terms of leading through this process and what Blaise just alluded to around getting to this point, there's been really good engagement with the third sector, and I think moving forward from this point, there has been one meeting held with third sector providers, which has been led by Wisest Trust. And that was sort of held back in May, I think, of this year. They're quite keen to pick that up and drive it moving forward, because they see that there is a need for this to happen moving forward. So I think there is sort of waiting in the background to see what the decision is going to be made here today, and then what the plan will be moving forward. So there is a genuineness within the third sector to drive this, because they see that this is a need for the city.
And so this is one of the recommendations from the social housing working group as well?
It's a resolution of council already that
Yes.
the social housing working group will progress this.
Thank you.
Right, Deputy Mayor, I've got you.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. A question, two questions to Blair. If you go to the executive summary, point 8, and it's the very top bullet point on page 107, we talk about the restriction for 10 years, and they can't be used as private rentals or on-sold. So in relation to that, I presume that's simply written into the condition of sale as a caveat on the title. How is that protected?
It will be one of those mechanisms, either a condition of sale by way of a contract between council and purchaser, or a caveat, or both.
Okay. Now, in the event, and with the passing of time, let's say 5 years down the track, the operator has a change of business model, wants to get out of the business or do something else, could council be asked to consider a variation to that agreement?
I presume any such request would have to come back to council for consideration, but certainly the other party would be bound by the contract that has been entered into, and to vary that would require a decision of council.
Okay, so I just wanted to raise that question as a possibility. The second question I have is that under the recommendations, we talk about the protection of the current tenancy obligations. And I do understand that, but my question relates to where is the protection for the concept of social housing rentals? I appreciate that's difficult to answer because the research shows that social housing rentals can range from 38% discount that a Hamilton pensioner tenants are enjoying against 20 and 25% at other facilities around New Zealand. But I just wondered if that was a missing element. So you're protecting the occupancy, but do you believe you are protecting the concept of social housing rentals, which are generally a discount of whatever sort on market rates? So could you just talk to me about that?
I'm just not exactly sure the question that's been posed there, but...
Well, no, I'll give it to you another way. Currently, our tenants are enjoying a discounted rental based on what's termed a social housing rental. How can we ensure, if it is sold, the stock, that they will continue not only to enjoy the occupancy under certain rules about behaviour and payment of rent and so on, how can we continue to ensure that the new owner reflects the discounted rental?
You could be very specific and add that to the recommendation. But I would note that the intention was that it would be of similar terms as the tenants currently enjoy with council. But if you wish to be specific in the resolution, that would make it very clear.
Councillor Gallagher, I've got you next for questions, then Councillor O'Leary.
Yes, just first of all, just confirm that this is the latest figures we have. The report somewhere says that by 2033, there'll be a 130% increase in those Hamiltonians over 65. Is that correct?
Sorry, that's not referred to in this report. So,
do you have any update information? I mean, obviously we're looking forward for the next 10 or 15 years.
Certainly, the demographic trends are for an ageing population.
Mm-hmm. Just coming back to the issue of the subsidy, and I cite, obviously we've all received this, I think, a letter from the MP Sue Moroney, and she's questioned the eligibility for the IRR subsidy. And so if you're a social housing provider, part of your sort of financial package when you put in a bid for council or you want to buy one of the properties, the financial model will obviously include a degree of central government subsidy that you get. Will any of that subsidy, and this comes back to the earlier question from Councillor Wilson, just clarify for me, amongst existing tenants, will they be eligible for this?
It would only be for new tenants in the criteria.
Only for
new tenants.
I didn't hear new
for new tenants.
Right. So what would that really mean in terms of the business model or the business case at the social housing if they're looking? Because that's so. In other words, if they see, I've got a confusion that apparently we're told we don't get this subsidy. Is that correct? Obviously we don't.
No, we are explicitly excluded from.
We're excluded. So the new social housing providers that would take over our pensioner stock, they will not get the subsidy for existing tenants?
I think there's a few points there. First of all, they have to be an accredited social housing provider for a start. And secondly, the subsidy would apply to those tenants who then meet the criteria. And thirdly, the extent and number of tenants that meet that criteria would depend on the turnover of tenants and the accommodation that's purchased, and then the nature of the tenants that the social housing provider places into that accommodation.
So really, in summary, the existing tenants, given circumstances, not eligible.
That's correct.
But as an existing tenant leaves, then the social housing provider can then bring in a tenant that would attract the IRR subsidy.
If they were accredited and
Yeah.
if the tenant met that criteria.
Yeah.
And that
Then-
does not exclude pensioner housing tenants.
Sure. Then that brings to the next point. We say that we're going to maintain, or a condition of sale is that our pensioner units must be maintained as social housing. Does that mean that there's not a prohibition or any to stop a social housing provider bringing in people that wouldn't necessarily meet an age criteria? Could be, the broader issue of social housing in terms of tenants.
The resolution as worded would allow that broader mix of tenants.
Broader mix. So
But we did, I
yeah.
think, councillors, we did hear through the submission process, the social housing providers are very sensitive to the mix of tenants in the complex, and that they are very conscious of some of the points that have been raised by the tenants who are concerned about the mixing of tenants other than elderly, and so whilst that allows it to occur, we also received assurance that the social housing provider is very cognizant of that particular challenge.
That wouldn't be contractual, would it?
No, the contractual obligation would be social housing, use for social housing.
So with respect, all that is, it's an assurance.
That's correct, as worded at the present time.
Yeah. So things can change. After 10 years, what then happens?
At the conclusion of the obligation timeframe, then the purchaser is not bound by any of the conditions that council has placed.
What's the circumstances that they could then, in terms of rationalisation of stock, because this is very common, we see it with the Housing New Zealand, where Housing New Zealand, as we're aware now, putting properties on for sale on the open market in order to rationalise stock. They could do that, presumably, and realise a market value in terms of location.
That is a possibility, and I think if council was concerned about that risk, you could extend that timeframe to mitigate that particular risk.
In terms of a discount, what are we calculating roughly? And we've had one experience which I respect with the Johnson Street property, which personally I think was a good case study and a good transfer from both parties. What are the kind of ranges of discount would we expect? Now, for example, would we expect a similar discount for our brand new, relative new properties in Peach Grove Road, say as against some of our older stock?
On Appendix B, Table B of Appendix 1 to the report, there is a table which outlines some financial scenarios for illustrative purposes of potential sale price scenarios. We know through experience that the sale of the Johnson Street property was about a 30% discount to market value. Ultimately, the sale price achieved for these properties will be dependent on the mix of factors such as the future income potential and the mix of tenants and the income potential from those properties. It won't necessarily be a straight value of the property based on its condition. It will be a mixture of that and income potential. So it's very hard to say what sale price is likely, but there's no doubt that a sale price less than full market value is likely due to the conditions that are placed on the purchaser.
But it's probably going to be, without putting words in your mouth, it's probably going to be a significant discount, isn't it?
It's
30% is pretty significant.
It could be up to that range, and ultimately that'll be determined through the process, and then ultimately those will come back to council for council to consider the offers and for council to either accept or not accept the offers. You are not obliged to sell any of the properties at any price by passing the resolution as proposed today. That will come back to council.
Because that would come back. That would come back. Can you tell me which other local authorities? I don't think there are any others. Which other local authorities are in the same process as us at the moment?
We are the only local authority at this stage in this process.
Your Worship, can I clarify?
The only?
There are other local authorities looking at their pensioner housing portfolios, but we're the only council at this stage of the process.
Just a final question, and this is not in any way reflecting on, but I think, there's, when we have a staff report, it's obviously the officer brings a neutral report. My understanding is on the Friday after the hearings, I wasn't there, the working group met with you, And I'm just trying to tease out whether these recommendations, I mean, obviously the content of the report I respect totally, but the actual finding recommendations, which says from management, and perhaps it's for the Chief Executive as well, I just want to clear, is this from the working group that met on the Friday or from you as management?
The report is from management, but the management and staff have met with the working group to discuss the recommendations to ensure that the working group members understood the background to the recommendations, but this is a staff recommendation for council to consider.
So were the working group comfortable with those recommendations when they met on Friday?
I think you would need to ask the respective members.
Thank you.
So, Deputy Mayor, did you have a question related to what has
It was
been...
a clarification of an answer.
Okay, ask that.
To Councillor Gallagher's question around is there any other local authority, I talked with the Whakatane District Council this morning. They have already begun a process of putting to the community an opportunity for council, and they use the word transfer, so difficult to identify that as sale or transfer, to a social housing provider. That proposal was not supported by its tenants. However, the community supported the transfer to social housing provider. The matter is now moving forward in February to their 10-year plan discussions, and it will then go out for the significant situation. So it's not correct to say no one else is doing it.
So us and Whakatane, but no one else?
Well, I've made no other inquiries.
Right.
So would it be true to say 100% of the people you've asked are doing it?
So yeah.
Right, okay,
100%.
to be frank, councillors, there is a variety of information in the
Every single
public
councillor
domain
you asked
about a number of local authorities who are looking at reviews, Wellington included. Where they go with those, of course, is a matter for those councils, but it would be wrong to say no other council is looking at this service. That would be incorrect. But whether they are this far down the track of that review, I think is a different question. Now, I've got Councillor O'Leary, then Councillor Mallett. Did you have more questions, Councillor?
No, mine was fleshed out.
Right, okay.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Leary, I've got you for question.
Great, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just trying to get my head around this the definition of new. I've heard some explanation today. I can't find in any document or on their website any definition of new tenant. If a purchaser purchases these units, those tenants weren't their tenants. So are they new tenants to a new purchaser? Therefore, they would, given all the other criteria is met, they would be a new tenant to a new purchaser.
I think just to clarify the question there, I think you're saying if a purchaser sign up new tenancy agreements with all of council's existing tenants, are they considered new in terms of the income-related rent subsidy if it's an accredited purchaser? We're not 100% certain, but I would say, based on our understanding, that's unlikely.
Okay.
I think the intention is that they are new tenants, as in not currently housed or accommodated in a complex. And so I think to interpret the way that potentially you're describing, I think would be difficult.
Okay.
Your Worship, it also requires a 3-month stand down. There has to be a 3-month stand down, and then
For a new tenant.
For a new tenant.
Yes, I think councillors, you are clear, aren't you? There is a process through MSD, and that process would apply. Yeah.
A second question that I have, and we heard in the public forum, and I'm going to paraphrase in my listening of that there was a suggestion that a new owner of the units would or could engineer tenants to exit by putting the rental up, and therefore they exit a tenant so a new tenant can come in. Is there anything in our recommendation
that would stop that?
The intention of the staff recommendation was that that should not occur, but the wording may not be explicit enough to give the councillors that comfort. The reference to meeting their tenancy obligations was certainly, I guess, looking to the current type of obligations they have with council, which are the matters I covered earlier. So we haven't been as explicit as to say their rent shall not change by more than X%.
Okay. And third question, on the recommendation under B Roman numeral 2, it says there that the pensioner housing properties be used solely for social housing purposes for at least 10 years after any sale. Does after any sale keep those units in social for social housing purposes then in perpetuity?
No, again, I think it's the intention is that after the sale from council to that particular purchaser.
But it does say after any sale.
So that again may be tidying up of wording required, but certainly the intention is that upon time on which council sells those to social housing provider A, that they must remain in social housing for a minimum of 10 years. So it doesn't. It's not intended to mean that they sold it further 10 years. It's not that intention.
Okay.
Look, I've just got some questions because I think people are going round and round in circles. So I want to use a real live example because I think this resolution reflects the arrangement between the Crosslight Trust and Habitat situation. Am I right? This is trying to turn that into words?
Yes, it's based off that.
Okay, so can you just explain to us what is that arrangement and how is that contractually protected?
Nicholas? Yeah. Nicholas is not here. Okay, so my understanding is that council on the sale agreement entered into a binding contract with those parties. That binding contract obviously required that those properties be utilised for the purposes of which they were sold, which is for social housing purposes, for a 10-year period, that there are significant financial penalties in that particular contract if those properties are used for other than that purpose. And council will recall that those properties were sold at a discount to the market value, and the financial penalties are linked back to the discount, and as the time frame moves closer to that 10-year period, that level of discount or penalty.
I believe they were sold with existing tenants.
They were sold with tenants in place,
yes.
And so those existing tenants went with the properties. Obviously, the tenants then entered into new tenancy arrangements with the new providers. And I think, as one of the councillors asked, there were some changes to the level of rent, but at the same time, those properties were of a very low standard when they were sold, and they were remodelled and brought to a very high standard by the new purchasers.
Right. So at the time of the purchase, which was a couple of years ago, there was no rent subsidies or any of those things applied?
No.
No. So Habitat Crosslight purchased those properties with the existing tenants to maintain in a social housing environment without any government rent subsidies.
That's correct.
Hold on, point of order, Your Worship.
Well, I'm trying to get...
How do you know they weren't getting a WINS accommodation supplement?
I'm talking
because
about...
that would not be...
Sorry, Councillor Wilson, just let me finish. I'm talking about the owners here. I'm trying to understand exactly
Very
what's...
careful. Okay.
The accommodation supplement, to be helpful, the accommodation supplement that the tenants may have been receiving would have continued to be in place, but I think Your Worship is saying that there was no grant type subsidy which is now available to accredited providers in play at that time.
Right, so if I can finish, because I can speak for myself. So what I was trying to understand is whether you're trying to reduce that arrangement in these words, and I'm trying to get clear what the arrangement at Johnson Street was. In addition to that, those tenants have been able to claim an accommodation supplement or whatever other assistance, government benefit assistance is available for accommodation. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
Right, okay. So that is this recommendation designed to kind of replicate that arrangement?
Yes, it is, and I think clause 1 or B1 is actually a tighter obligation than that which occurred 2 years ago. So I think this is a further level of assurance for the tenants. That particular clause was not a resolution of the council at the time that sale occurred.
Right.
So this is a higher level of assurance.
Okay. So my recollection was when we heard from Habitat when they came and made a submission here, they were asked a question about their existing tenants today and what had happened to those. Now, I can't see it in the notes here, and I didn't bring my pack of submissions, but my recollection was they said that the tenants that were there remained there.
That's correct.
There was no change to the tenants. The rent was adjusted, their units were fixed up, and they just stayed there. Have I got that right?
That's right. I'm just looking to attachment 3 back in the August council meeting where Nick Green summarised that, and some of the units were vacant at the time of sale when they purchased, and the tenants, there were some tenants there. They were offered the chance and they chose to stay in the complex.
Right.
And then the other units were renovated, and then obviously new tenants were bought.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions, councillors? Councillor Miller?
Just a real simple one. We seem to be going round and round in circles about trying to make sure people get the same terms and conditions. Every single day in the city, properties are sold.
Have you got a question?
No, well, I just...
Because you can say that.
Why do we not use the standard legal term that every time a property is sold with a tenant, the existing tenancy conditions continue, which is what we're trying to do, eh? That's what we're trying to put in this thing. Why don't we just use one of the terms in a normal sale and purchase agreement?
That question there. Could you answer that question, thanks?
Council can certainly add that to the resolution. What I would note is that we obviously have a contract with the tenants.
Yep.
The level of rental income is set by council policy.
Yeah.
So in the instance here, that obviously our policy would not apply to the future. So that's an element which is unique.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Right. Are there any other questions, councillors? No. Right. There is a recommendation from staff on page 107, which I think has been analysed through the questioning. Is there a resolution, a motion?
I'm happy to move, but I'm also happy to look at some minor changes, particularly around the areas that Councillor Mallett alluded to, of the removal of the word in B, Roman numerals 2, removal of at least. But I'm not aware of any other specific changes that you recommended.
Councillor Pascoe, we also raised the fact that point 1 is inconsistent with point 2, because the tenancy agreement states that they're entitled to stay there as long as they meet the conditions, and then suddenly it's overridden by the fact that after 10 years...
Yes, thank you, Councillor Wilson. So I'm just at the moment I'm with the mover of a recommendation. So Councillor Pascoe, what you're saying is you are moving that with some amendments, and those are the removal of the word at least.
With that one amendment, the removal of at least, but I wasn't aware of any other minor changes that Councillor Mallett alluded to, apart from the words.
I might approach it like this, councillors, and I wanted to know if there's a mover, will there be a seconder for that kind of a motion subject to some changes? So what I'm thinking about doing here is rather than spend the next 10 minutes fiddling around with words, that we will take, and I'm mindful that there are people here and we don't want to, they're here to hear what we decide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 10-minute break for people who want to move a motion, which is you've signalled that, and I think Councillor Gallagher, you had signalled you would have an amendment.
I have an amendment which I'd be grateful if that could be flashed on the screen at the appropriate time, but I obviously want to wait for them, wait for the motion. Once it's finally decided, then I...
Right, so what we're going to do is, we're going to take a 10-minute break to allow people who wish to develop alterations to words and get their words correct to take the time to do that, so that when we come back people feel comfortable with what it is they're doing and we're not spending a long time fiddling with words. Thank you.
Appreciate it.